It began with a silence so unusual that even seasoned palace aides reportedly stopped speaking in the corridors of Clarence House. One closed-door meeting, one unexpected royal summons, and by the time Prince Harry and Meghan Markle learned what King Charles III had decided, insiders claim the shock inside Montecito was immediate and overwhelming. Because this was not a simple family disagreement anymore. It was the kind of royal decision that could permanently redraw the line between exile and belonging. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Reports suggest the meeting itself had been planned quietly for weeks, hidden beneath the usual flood of royal schedules and carefully managed appearances. But according to palace administrative whispers, the atmosphere surrounding this particular discussion felt dramatically different from anything aides had witnessed in recent months. The king, already fussy, enormous physical and emotional strain during his ongoing health battle, allegedly entered the room alongside senior advisors and Prince William carrying documents tied to the future operational structure of the monarchy itself. What began as another internal review reportedly evolved into something far more devastating. Insiders now claim that Charles finally approved a major decision regarding Harry and Meghan's long uncertain place within the royal institution, ending months of hesitation that had frustrated senior palace figures behind closed doors. For a long time, there had reportedly remained a fragile hope that some form of reconciliation could still emerge. Even after the interviews, even after the memoirs, even after years of public tensions that repeatedly shook the foundations of the House of Windsor. Sources close to royal circles suggest Harry still believed his father's emotional attachment to him would eventually outweigh the pressure coming from institutional adviso. RS determined to protect the monarchy from further instability. Meghan, according to various interpretations circulating among commentators, allegedly viewed the distance between California and the palace as temporary rather than permanent. But then something changed almost overnight. Palace insiders began noticing sudden shifts in communication channels between Montecito representatives and royal offices. Calls reportedly became shorter. Responses allegedly slowed down. Meetings that once remained possible suddenly disappeared from schedules entirely. One veteran royal commentator would later describe it as the moment the temperature inside the palace turned icy. And perhaps most unsettling of all was the silence coming from senior royals themselves. No reassuring leaks, no carefully crafted gestures toward unity. Only growing whispers that Charles had finally accepted something he had resisted for years, that the survival of the institution may now require emotional sacrifices he refused to make. Reports suggest even aides loyal to the king appeared unsettled by the emotional weight surrounding the decision, because beneath the protocol and bureaucracy stood a father confronting the painful reality that the gap between duty and blood had become almost impossible to bridge. Yet while the public still knew very little about what had truly happened behind those closed doors, insiders claimed the emotional shock surrounding Charles's decision was only the beginning, because the deeper reason behind it reportedly traces back to a growing fear inside the monarchy itself. For months, the palace tried to project stability, public smiles, carefully managed appearances. But behind the scenes, reports suggest senior royals had become increasingly concerned that private family tensions were evolving into something far more dangerous: a struggle over legacy, trust, and the future authority of the crown itself. According to whispers circulating through royal administrative circles, the atmosphere inside the monarchy had become dramatically heavier following the king's ongoing health concerns. Every appearance by King Charles III reportedly intensified urgent conversations about succession, continuity, and the long-term survival of the institution. What once seemed like temporary family turbulence was now allegedly being treated as a direct threat to the crown's future stability. And at the center of those conversations stood the unresolved crisis surrounding Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Insiders claim that as Charles struggled privately with both emotional exhaustion and physical vulnerability, senior palace figures increasingly feared the monarchy could no longer survive in a state of uncertainty. Reports suggest Prince William became one of the strongest voices pushing for what aides allegedly described as clear institutional boundary regarding the Sussexes, not out of personal bitterness alone, according to royal commentators, but from a growing belief that the crown itself was entering one of the most fragile periods of the modern era. Palace officials reportedly feared that additional memoirs, interviews, or private disclosures could inflict irreversible damage during a time when the monarchy desperately needed unity and discipline. Those close to internal discussions claim every new media rumor triggered fresh anxiety behind palace walls, because trust inside the royal household had allegedly deteriorated to levels many senior courtiers had never witnessed before. Yet even amid the widening divide, Meghan reportedly continued searching for a pathway back into royal influence circles. Various interpretations of her strategy describe attempts to maintain relevance, preserve public leverage, and avoid complete separation from the prestige that once surrounded her royal role. But insiders whisper that the resistance she encountered from senior institutional figures became colder and more coordinated with each passing month. Meanwhile, Harry reportedly found himself trapped in an increasingly painful emotional conflict. Sources close to royal observers suggest he still longed for reconciliation with his father and brother, even while publicly standing beside Meghan through years of escalating confrontation. Friends of the Duke allegedly noticed moments of visible emotional strain as the distance between California and the palace continued to grow wider. The deeper tragedy, according to royal experts, was that both sides had reportedly stopped viewing the crisis through the same lens entirely. For Harry, it may still have felt like a wounded family dispute waiting to heal. But for the institution, insiders claim the matter had evolved into something far more severe: a battle between family forgiveness and institutional survival. And once those two priorities began colliding directly, the emotional fractures inside the monarchy reportedly became almost impossible to contain. Behind closed doors, advisors alleged, Lie warned Charles that hesitation itself was becoming dangerous. The palace could no longer exist in permanent uncertainty while preparing for an unstable future shaped by illness, succession fears, and public scrutiny, unlike anything the modern monarchy had endured before. Yet while the public still believed reconciliation remained possible, insiders claim one private document changed everything almost overnight. It was not a speech, not a televised announcement, not even a royal appearance. According to multiple palace whispers, the moment that truly altered the atmosphere came through paperwork, cold, official, and devastatingly final in tone. Reports suggest the document itself arrived quietly inside the machinery of the monarchy, buried beneath layers of protocol and administrative language that masked the emotional earthquake unfolding behind palace walls. But insiders claim those who reviewed it immediately understood the deeper meaning hidden beneath the formal wording. This was not simply another operational adjustment. It was allegedly the beginning of a permanent restructuring of the royal future itself. According to royal commentators familiar with internal discussions, King Charles III spent weeks reviewing revised operational plans tied directly to the monarchy's long-term survival. Every page reportedly reflected growing concerns about stability, public trust, and the need to protect the institution during a period of extraordinary uncertainty. The king's ongoing health battle had already intensified fears surrounding succession and continuity, but now insiders suggest advisors were urging him to confront another painful issue that had remained unresolved for far too long: the lingering question of where Prince Harry and Meghan Markle would ultimately stand in the monarchy's future structure. Reports indicate the discussions became increasingly severe as officials allegedly focused on limiting future ceremonial access, institutional privileges, and any remaining assumptions regarding eventual reintegration into senior royal life. Palace insiders claimed the language surrounding those conversations carried an unmistakable finality. Certain pathways that once remained technically possible were now reportedly being removed from consideration altogether. And while the palace publicly maintained silence, whispers behind closed doors suggested the emotional weight surrounding the decision became almost unbearable for Charles himself. Sources close to royal administrative circles described the king as deeply conflicted throughout the process. On one side stood his role as a father still emotionally attached to his son despite years of public damage. On the other stood the brutal demands of an institution increasingly convinced that uncertainty itself posed a growing danger to the crown. Insiders allegedly described the final decision as firm but emotionally painful, a phrase that quickly spread among royal observers trying to understand the magnitude of what had just occurred. But for Meghan, according to various interpretations circulating through royal media circles, the move reportedly felt far more personal than institutional. Sources claim she viewed the restrictions not as procedural necessity, but as a direct rejection by the very establishment she once fought desperately to reshape. The emotional fallout inside Montecito allegedly intensified almost immediately as the realization settled in that certain doors within royal life were no longer quietly waiting to reopen. Yet perhaps the most heartbreaking reaction reportedly came from Harry himself. Friends of the Duke allegedly noticed a dramatic emotional shift after details surrounding the decision began filtering back through private channels. For years, despite public tensions and repeated conflicts, Harry reportedly continued believing some form of reconciliation would eventually emerge between himself and the family he had left behind. But insiders whisper that. This document shattered that illusion more completely than any interview, headline, or public confrontation ever had, because paperwork carried a different kind of finality: cold, structured, unemotional. And once institutional decisions become embedded within the palace system, reversing them becomes almost impossible. Suddenly, the separation no longer felt temporary. It felt structural, permanent. A line carefully drawn between the future of the monarchy and the couple now living thousands of miles away from it. But what truly stunned royal observers was not the restriction itself. It was who reportedly encouraged Charles to finally move forward. For years, Prince William remained publicly restrained whenever Prince Harry and Meghan Markle dominated headlines. But according to royal insiders, behind palace walls, the future king had slowly adopted a far firmer position, one rooted not in anger, but in protection. Reports suggest the transformation did not happen suddenly. It was built, slowly through years of mounting frustration, repeated breaches of trust, and what palace figures allegedly viewed as an escalating threat to the monarchy's internal stability. While the public often focused on emotional family tensions, insiders claim William had increasingly begun viewing the situation through an entirely different lens. To him, according to royal commentators, this was no longer simply about wounded relationships between brothers. It had become a question of survival for the institution he would one day inherit. Sources close to royal administrative circles suggest William spent months privately urging King Charles III to prioritize what aides allegedly described as institutional stability over emotional compromise. The future king reportedly feared that continued uncertainty surrounding Harry and Meghan's status risked creating ongoing instability during one of the monarchy's most vulnerable periods in decades. Charles's health struggles had already intensified. Pressure behind the scenes, and according to insiders, William believed the crown could no longer afford ambiguity, hesitation, or endless attempts at reconciliation that repeatedly collapsed under public scrutiny. Senior aides reportedly supported his position more strongly with each passing month. Palace insiders whisper that private confidence inside royal operations had deteriorated severely after years of interviews, memoirs, leaked conversations, and deeply personal disclosures that allegedly shattered long-standing expectations of royal discretion. According to various interpretations circulating among commentators, many officials no longer viewed the Sussex conflict as temporary turbulence. Instead, they reportedly saw it as a permanent fracture that demanded permanent boundaries. And standing quietly beside William throughout this growing shift was Catherine, Princess of Wales. Sources claim Catherine fully supported maintaining distance after years of emotional strain that insiders suggest deeply affected both her private life and public role within the monarchy. While she remained publicly composed, palace whispers allegedly described a growing exhaustion behind closed doors as repeated controversies continued pulling the royal family into cycles of damage control and media storms. For William, according to those familiar with internal dynamics, protecting Catherine and their children reportedly became inseparable from protecting the crown itself. That emotional calculation changed everything, because once the issue became tied not only to royal protocol but also to the future security of his own family, insiders claim William's position hardened dramatically. Palace figures allegedly began describing trust as damaged beyond repair, a phrase that spread rapidly among royal observers attempting to understand why reconciliation efforts suddenly appeared to collapse all at once. Yet perhaps the most tragic part of the entire situation was that Harry Italy never fully realized how firm William's stance had become. Sources suggest the Duke still quietly hoped his older brother would intervene privately to soften Charles's position before any final institutional separation took shape. Some insiders even claim Harry believed their shared history, childhood bond, and mutual grief over the loss of Diana, Princess of Wales, would ultimately outweigh palace strategy. But according to royal commentators, the reality unfolding behind closed doors was far colder than Harry imagined. Reports now suggest William backed the final decision completely, believing it was necessary not out of cruelty, but out of duty to the monarchy's future. And that realization reportedly hit Harry harder than almost anything else because it forced him to confront a painful possibility he had spent years avoiding. Those close to the Sussex circle reportedly described Prince Harry as deeply shaken in the aftermath of Charles's decision, not because he expected complete restoration overnight, but because, according to insiders, he never truly believed the door would close this firmly. Reports suggest the emotional fallout inside Montecito became immediate once the full seriousness of the palace position finally settled in. For years, despite the interviews, public confrontations, documentaries, and explosive revelations, Harry allegedly continued holding on to one quiet belief that somewhere beneath the institutional coldness, there would always remain a pathway back to the family he left behind. But insiders now whisper that the finality surrounding the recent decision shattered that belief more brutally than he ever anticipated. Sources close to royal observers claim Harry became increasingly emotional during private conversations about the future of his family's ties to the monarchy. Friends allegedly described moments of deep frustration mixed with visible heartbreak as he tried to process how dramatically attitudes inside the palace had shifted over recent years. According to various interpretations circulating among commentators, the realization that even Prince William fully supported the institutional separation reportedly struck Harry with particular force, because for all the public conflict between the brothers, some insiders claim Harry still quietly believed blood would ultimately outweigh protocol when the situation reached its breaking point. Instead, the opposite appeared to happen. And while Harry reportedly wrestled with grief, anger, and disbelief, Meghan Markle allegedly viewed the situation through an entirely different emotional lens. Sources suggest Meghan felt profoundly betrayed after years of believing public pressure, shifting media narratives, and growing international influence could eventually force the monarchy into a softer position. According to royal commentators, she allegedly underestimated how deeply palace officials viewed the conflict as an institutional threat rather than a temporary family dispute. What Meghan reportedly saw as resistance to change, insiders claim the monarchy increasingly viewed as a battle for survival during one of the most fragile periods of Charles's reign. The emotional divide between perception and reality only intensified the pain surrounding the situation. Friends close to Harry allegedly noticed him reflecting more frequently on his former life inside the royal system. Not necessarily with regret alone, but with a growing awareness of how permanently distant that world had now become. Sources whisper that conversations about his military service, his past public role, and even memories tied to his mother, Diana, Princess of Wales, reportedly carried a heavier emotional tone than before. Insiders described him as a man increasingly caught between two identities that no longer seemed capable of coexisting peacefully. One part of him remained deeply connected to the institution that shaped his entire life. The other remained bound to the new existence he built alongside Meghan in California. And somewhere between those two worlds, according to royal observers, Harry allegedly began realizing the bridge connecting them may already have collapsed completely. Meghan, meanwhile, reportedly feared something even larger than personal rejection. Sources claim she became increasingly concerned about permanent exclusion from future royal relevance altogether. Because while public attention still followed the Sussexes closely, insiders whisper that influence inside the monarchy itself had quietly faded far more dramatically than many outsiders realized. Royal commentators now argue the couple may have fundamentally underestimated just how hardened palace attitudes had become after years of escalating conflict, repeated disclosures, and institutional embarrassment. What once may have been viewed internally as temporary turbulence had reportedly transformed into something far colder and more permanent. Yet even as emotions exploded behind the closed doors, the palace itself remained almost completely silent, and that silence may have revealed the real strategy unfolding at the heart of the monarchy. The most striking part of King Charles III's unexpected decision was not the drama surrounding it. It was the calm. No public attack, no retaliatory statement, no explosive confrontation. Instead, according to insiders, the monarchy responded with something far colder and potentially far more permanent. Reports suggest that behind palace walls, senior advisors deliberately chose silence as their primary weapon. Not weakness, not avoidance. Strategy. According to royal commentators familiar with internal operations, the institution had learned through years of crisis that emotional public battles only deepened instability. So rather than fueling another media war with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, insiders claim the palace quietly adopted a doctrine of controlled distance, one designed to slowly reduce relevance without triggering open warfare. Sources close to royal administrative circles allege officials believed silence protected the crown far more effectively than retaliation ever could. Every unanswered headline, every ignored accusation, every carefully measured absence reportedly formed part of a broader strategy intended to preserve institutional dignity during an increasingly fragile period for the monarchy. The calculation, according to insiders, was brutally simple. Public conflict creates emotional sympathy. Silence creates isolation. And over time, isolation weakens influence far more effectively than confrontation. Yet despite approving the strategy, Charles reportedly remained emotionally conflicted throughout the process. Those close to palace discussions suggest the king struggled privately with the emotional consequences of what was unfolding, because beneath the constitutional calculations and institutional planning stood a father fully aware that each new boundary pushed his son further away, emotionally as well as physically. Insiders claim moments of hesitation continued even after the operational plans had already been finalized, but according to royal observers, the pressure surrounding Charles had become overwhelming. His health concerns reportedly intensified demands for long-term stability, while senior advisors increasingly warned that unresolved tensions could damage the monarchy during the coming transition of reign. And slowly, insiders whisper, emotional compromise began losing ground to institutional survival. Meanwhile, reports suggest Harry and Meghan quietly struggled with the growing reality of reduced access and fading influence within royal circles. Invitations allegedly became rarer. Internal communication reportedly narrowed further. Even symbolic connections to the monarchy appeared increasingly distant as palace operations moved forward without them. Royal commentators claim the shift was not sudden enough to create a public explosion, but gradual anew. Go to send an unmistakable message over time. The center of royal gravity was moving on without the Sussexes, and nowhere was that shift reportedly more visible than in conversations surrounding William's future monarchy. According to insiders, aides increasingly described the Prince of Wales's long-term vision as streamlined, disciplined, and tightly controlled. Fewer uncertainties, fewer competing power centers, fewer emotional risks capable of destabilizing the institution. Sources claim William believes the future survival of the monarchy depends on narrowing its operational core and enforcing stronger boundaries than previous generations were willing to impose. That philosophy, according to palace figures, became deeply influential during recent decisions surrounding Harry and Meghan. Royal insiders now suggest the current strategy was never designed merely to manage a temporary family dispute. It was allegedly constructed to establish long-term institutional boundaries before the inevitable transition of reign fully arrives. Every decision, every silence, every carefully controlled distance reportedly serves a larger purpose tied to the monarchy's future survival after Charles. And while the public continued searching for dramatic confrontations or emotional reconciliations, the palace quietly advanced a colder strategy built not around repairing fractures, but around containing them permanently. Yet behind all the strategy and institutional calculation remained one heartbreaking reality that reportedly continued to haunt King Charles himself. Behind the image of a king protecting the crown, reports suggest there remains a father privately devastated by how far the fracture has gone. Because while the institution may demand distance, blood has a way of refusing to disappear quietly. According to palace insiders, the emotional burden surrounding the decision reportedly weighed heavily on King Charles III long before anything became operationally final. Behind the carefully measured public appearances and composed royal statements, sources claim Charles spent months wrestling with a conflict that no constitutional document could fully resolve. Because this was never only about royal protocol, public controversy, or institutional stability. It was about a father confronting the possibility that the emotional damage inside his family may have already reached the point of no return. Reports suggest moments of hesitation continued almost until the very end. Advisors allegedly pushed for clearer boundaries while the palace struggled to prepare for an uncertain future shaped by illness, succession concerns, and growing institutional pressure. Yet insiders whisper that Charles repeatedly delayed certain decisions because some part of him still hoped reconciliation might eventually emerge from the wreckage. Sources close to royal observers claim the king never fully stopped believing that peace within the family remained possible. even after years of painful public conflict. That hope, according to commentators, may have been one of the few emotional threads still connecting him to Harry despite everything that had happened. But Charles's worsening health challenges reportedly intensified the urgency surrounding the monarchy's future. Palace insiders suggest the king became increasingly aware that time itself was no longer a guarantee. Every health update allegedly deepened internal concerns about succession stability and the need to solidify operational structures before the eventual transition of reign. According to royal commentators, that pressure forced Charles into making decisions emotionally painful enough that he may once have avoided them entirely. Because while his instincts as a father reportedly pulled him toward forgiveness, the institutions surrounding him demanded certainty, discipline, and long-term protection. And somewhere between those two forces, insiders claim Charles became trapped in a conflict that quietly exhausted him emotionally. For Prince Harry, however, reports suggest the palace decision carried a very different emotional meaning. Sources claim Harry interpreted the move not simply as institutional distancing, but as a final emotional rejection from the family he once believed would always leave the door open for him. Friends allegedly described moments of deep sadness and disbelief as the reality settled in that the separation now appeared structural rather than temporary, according to various interpretations circulating among royal experts. The pain surrounding the situation may have been intensified precisely because Harry never expected his father to allow the divide to become this permanent. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle reportedly continued believing powerful palace figures deliberately isolated the couple over time. Sources close to royal commentary circles claim Meghan viewed the gradual reduction in communication, access, and influence as part of a coordinated effort to push Sussexes further from the center of royal life. Whether true or not, insiders suggest that perception only deepened the emotional divide between California and the monarchy itself. Because by this stage, both sides reportedly viewed the same events through entirely different emotional realities. One side believed the institution was protecting itself. The other believed they were being erased from it. And standing in the middle of that widening emotional battlefield remained Charles himself. Royal commentators now frequently describe the king as trapped between fatherhood and duty, a phrase that has come to define the tragedy unfolding behind palace walls. Because even after approving the decision, insiders claim the emotional consequences reportedly continued haunting him privately. And as the monarchy moves into an uncertain future, insiders believe the consequences of this decision may shape the House of Windsor for years to come. What began as a painful family disagreement has now reportedly evolved into something much larger, a defining moment for the modern monarchy itself. Because King Charles III's unexpected decision was never only about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It was about the survival of the institution during one of the most fragile periods in royal history. According to palace insiders, the monarchy now views the entire situation through the lens of long-term institutional stability, rather than temporary emotional conflict. What once appeared to the public as a deeply personal family fracture has reportedly become part of a much broader strategy tied to the future survival of the crown itself. Sources claim senior royal figures increasingly feared that ongoing uncertainty surrounding Harry and Meghan's position risked weakening the monarchy during a period already overshadowed by illness, succession anxiety, and growing public scrutiny. And so, insiders whisper, the palace chose permanence over ambiguity, even at enormous emotional cost. At the center of that future, according to royal commentators, stand Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales. Over recent years, the couple have reportedly become the symbolic core of the monarchy's next chapter, representing continuity, discipline, and institutional calm during a time of extraordinary instability. Sources close to palace operations suggest aides increasingly describe the future monarchy as smaller, more controlled, and far less willing to tolerate internal disruption than previous generations once were. William's vision, insiders claim, centers on preserving public trust above all else, even when doing so requires painful personal sacrifices behind closed doors. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan allegedly face growing uncertainty regarding what their long-term relationship with the royal family will ultimately become. Reports suggest the emotional distance between California and the palace now feels far deeper than geography alone. Royal experts increasingly argue that public reconciliation appears dramatically more difficult than it once did, not only because of damaged relationships, but because institutional boundaries have now reportedly hardened into formal strategy. Every unanswered headline, every quiet absence, every carefully managed silence has allegedly reinforced the growing perception that the monarchy is preparing for a future in which the Sussexes exist permanently outside its operational core. Yet despite the coldness of the institutional strategy, insiders insist the emotional pain surrounding it has never fully disappeared for Charles himself. According to sources close to royal observers, his reign is increasingly being defined by one agonizing balance: his responsibility as sovereign against his grief as a father. The monarchy demanded certainty. Duty demanded protection. But blood, memory, and family loyalty reportedly continued pulling him in the opposite direction long after the decision itself had already been made. That immotio, now contradiction, according to commentators, may ultimately become one of the defining tragedies of Charles's reign. Because even while attempting to stabilize the crown during one of its most vulnerable modern periods, he reportedly remains haunted by the personal cost required to achieve it, and perhaps that is why insiders now believe this decision may become one of the most consequential moments of his entire reign, not because of the headlines it created, but because of what it revealed about the future direction of the monarchy itself. A monarchy increasingly willing to choose institutional survival over emotional reconciliation. A monarchy preparing for transition, discipline, and control during uncertain times ahead. And somewhere behind the palace gates, beyond the silence, the unanswered question still lingers whether this was truly the end of Harry and Meghan's royal story, or only the beginning of an even more painful chapter. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.